pleasure and privilege then to welcome for our last lecturer of the day Professor Giuseppe Mazzotta, who is going to talk to us about Canto 19 of the Inferno. First he's going to start with the reading of the canto.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for inviting me here. It's really a pleasure to be part of this enterprise of yours. And it's an honor to be with this young generation, these young guys who are doing so well. It's I'm very happy to see that the torch is being passed on to a new generation of Americanists and Dantists. I'm alluding to the pound quotations. So I start reading Canto 19 in Italian, as has been the tradition, and then I will say a few things about the canto. O Simon Mago, o miseri seguaci, che le cose di Dio, che di bontate devono essere spose, voi rapaci, per oro e per argento adulterate. Or convien che per voi suoni la tromba, però che nella terza voce state. Già eravamo alla seguente tomba, montati dello scoglio, in quella parte che appunto sopra mezzo il fosso piomba. O somma sapienza, quanta è l'arte che mostri in cielo, in terra, nel mondo, e quanto giusto tu virtù comparte. Io vidi per le coste e per lo fondo piena la pietra livida di fuori, di un largo tutti, e ciascuno era tondo. Non mi pareano né ampi né maggiori che quei che sono il mio bel San Giovanni, fatto per luogo di battezzatori, l'un dei quali ancora non è molt'anni, rupio per un che dentro vannegava, e questo si suggerisce, io non scanni. Fuori della bocca, ciascuno soperchiava di un peccatore i piedi e delle gambe fino al grosso, e l'altro dentro stava. Le piante erano a tutti accese entrambe, perché sì forte guizzava le giunte, che spezzate verien, ritorte e strambe. Al suolo il fiammeggiar delle cose unte, muoversi pur su per la strema buccia, t'era lì dai calcagni alle punte. Chi è colui, maestro, che si cruccia guizzando più che gli altri suoi consorti, dissi io, e cui più rogia fiamma succia? Ed egli a me, se tu vuoi che io ti porti laggiù per quella riva che più giace, da lui saprai di sé e dei suoi torti. Ed io, tanto m'è bel quanto a te piace, tu sei signore, e sai che io non mi parto dal tuo volere, e sai quel che si tace. Allora venimmo in sull'argine quarto, volgemmo e discendemmo a mano stanca, laggiù nel fondo foracchiato e arto. Un maestro ancora della sua anca non mi dispose, sì mi giunse al rotto di quel che si piangeva con la zanca. O qualche sei che il di su tien di sotto, anima trista come pal commessa, comincia io a dire, se puoi fa motto. Io stava con il frate che confessa lo perfido assassino, che poi che fitto richiama lui, perché la morte cessa. Ed el gridò, se tu già costi ritto, Bonifazio, di parecchi anni mi mentì lo scritto. Se tu si tosto di quel avversazio per lo quale non temesti, torre inganno la bella donna e poi di farne strazio. Tal mi fec'io, ma son color che stanno per non intender ciò che loro risposto, quasi sornati, e rispondere non sanno. Allora Virgilio disse, dilli tosto, non son colui che credi. E io risposi, come a me fu imposto. Che lo spirito tutti storse i piedi, poi sospirando e con voce di pianto mi disse, dunque, che a me richiedi? Se di saper ch'io sia ti calco tanto che tu abbi per ora ripa corsa, sappi che io fui vestito del gran manto, e veramente fui figliuol dell'orsa, cupido, sì per avanzar gli ossati che sull'aver, e qui me misi in borsa. Di sotto al capo mio sono gli altri tratti che precedettero me simoneggiando per le fessure della pietra piatti. Laggiù cascherò, io altresì quando verrà colui che io credea che tu fossi, allor che io feci il subito rimando. Ma più il tempo già che i piedi mi cossi e che io sono stato così sottosopra che non starà piantato coi piedi rossi, che dopo lui verrà di più laida opra, di ver ponente un pastor senza legge, di che convien che a lui e me ricopra. Nuovo Iason sarà, di cui si legge nei Maccabei, e come quei fu molle suo regge, così fia lui chi Francia regge. Io non so se io vi fui qui troppo folle, che io pur risposi a lui a questo modo, questo metro. O mi di, quanto tesoro volle nostro Signore imprima da San Pietro che ponesse le chiavi in tua palia. Certo non chiese se non vienmi retro, né Pier né gli altri torsero a Mattia oro e argento quando fu sortito al luogo che per te l'anima ria. Però ti sta che tu sei ben punito, e guarda ben la mal tolta moneta che esser ti fece contro Carlo ardito. E se non fosse che ancor lo mi vieta la reverenza delle somme chiavi che tu tenesti nella vita lieta, io userei parole ancor più gravi che la vostra avarizia il mondo attrista, calcando i buoni e sollevando i bravi. Di voi, pastor, s'accorse il Vangelista quando colei che siede sopra l'acqua e puttaneggiar coi regi a lui fu vista, quella che con le 7 teste nacque e dalle 10 corna ebbe argomento finché virtute al suo marito piacque. Fatto v'avete Dio d'oro e d'argento, e che altro da voi all'idolatra, se non che di uno e voi ne orate 100. Ah, Costantino, di quanto mal furmatre, non la tua conversione, ma quella dote che da te prese il primo ricco padre. E mentre io li cantava cotai note, o ira o coscienza che il mordesse, forte spingava con ambo le piote. Io credo ben che al mio duca piacesse, con sì contenta labbia sempre attese, lo son delle parole vere espresse. Però con ambo le braccia mi prese, e poi che tutto su mi sebbe al petto, rimontò per la via onde discese, né si stancò d'avermi a sé distretto, si men portò sopra il colmo dell'arco che del 4 al 5 argine è tragetto, quivi soavemente spose il carco, soave per lo scoglio, sconcio ed erto che sarebbe alle capre duro varco, indi un altro vallone mi fu scoperto. The canto says a few things just to draw attention to the sounds and even the structure and things that I'll be discussing. The mode of the canto is really the apostrophe, the rhetorical mode, apostrophes and invectives, because this is largely going to be a reflection of prophetic speech and the dangers in that claim, the force of that claim. O Simon Mago, then another apostle, O Somma Sapienza, and then of course I, Costantino, and the invectives, the invectives around lines 89. Io non so se mi fuppi troppo folle, che io poi risposi a lui a questo metro te, or mi di. That is still part of this mode of invective against, this is against Pope Nicholas III, more about that in a moment. The other element that I would like to draw your attention to is this intrusion, an autobiographical intrusion, not unusual, but here it's very, very striking. Dante is witnessing this, talking to, meets the Simonists, Simoniac popes, those who have violated the sacreds, who have trafficked and sold holy things for money, and now he recalls a scene of violation that an experience of violation of his own youth, where he says, describing the holes, he's alluding to, he's talking, he describes them in terms of the forms for the baptism that he broke. He says, because someone was drowning in it. And then he adds, using his own text, let this be the seal, a word suggello in Italian, which is really the seal of legal authority. This is the seal of the king. This is the seal of the prophet. Let me put the seal on this. This is my authority as a poet and as a man that is at stake. This is so. I will talk about this scene and hopefully present a text that can help us understand some of these issues. And then there is a long allusion, of course, that the simony is not just a question concerning the church, but also concerns the empire. There is the last apostrophe, and balancing nicely the first apostrophe to the so-called donation of Constantine to Pope Sylvester, the alienation of property that belonged to the empire, and thereby a breach into the integrity of the empire and the division that Dante posits between the sacred and the secular in texts such as Monarchia and elsewhere in the poem. This is a canto that has been heavily annotated. I will not, when I send in my finished text, I will not have for sure all the bibliographical items. Our own Nick Havley, Professor Havley, has written about the Franciscan aspects in general, but also has allusions to one particular moment here of Franciscans in Canto 19. Bruno Nardi has written extensively about the donation of Constantine, and Richard Kay, many people. I'm keeping them all in mind. I will not mention any of them as I read my text. And let me draw your attention also to some other modality that I wish you could catch as you were listening to my reading of the canto. Look at the first line, O Simon Mago, O miseri seguaci. You have a pattern of alliterations, Simon, Mago, miseri, seguaci, double M and sibilants, but also a chiastic structure, Simon, Mago, miseri, MS, etc. And I think that this is the chiasmus, this is the chiasmus from the Greek he. The chiasmus implies this kind of crossing of, not a linear movement, but a crossing of the realities that Dante is describing. So let me just read a few remarks that I have, and I hope they will be fairly clear. Inferno 18, as we saw from the previous speaker's talk, is the cant of the panders, seducers, and flatterers, which ended with the figure of a harlot, Thais, in Terence's comedy, the eunuchus, the eunuch. Inferno 19, we are in the third pouch of the 8th circle. Dante meets the Simoniacs, who are a number of popes planted heads down, as we saw, into holes in the rock and with flames of fire on their feet. Their sin, which is the sacrilege of the priestly caste against the Holy Spirit, picks up the sexual language of fraud and harlotry with which the previous canto, which it had thematized, and now with which it had closed. Again, O Simon Mago, O miseri seguaci, delle cose di Dio che di bontà devono essere spose, voi rapaci per ore argento avulterate. Clear allusion to the adultery, alterate, maybe and certainly the prostitution or conveniences, etc. Although the interplay of prostitution and the ethics of this mystical relation will turn out to be central to the deeper political, theological purposes of the canto, the opening apostrophe seeks to define historically the sin of simony. It recalls Simon, the sorcerer of Samaria, and the eponym, the one who gives the name to the sin, for the sin, and accordingly brings us to the sacred time of the Pentecost. The Pentecost, as you know, as I hope you know, refers primarily to an event of language, speaking in tongues, which is conceived as a sacred event. Let me explain what I mean by the sacred. I understand the sacred because that's really what the point of my paper is to be. How does Dante define sacredness in the context of sacrilege and defilement and the need for that in order to be able to define the sacred. I understand the sacred as a complicated, radically ambiguous category for Dante. The word sacro, Paradiso 25:1, can describe both the antithetically demonic and holy content of his poem. It's also used in the sense of powerful, accursed, or destructive hunger, as in O Sacra Fame for Gold, Purgatorio 40, which is clearly from the book 3 of the Aeneid. It's found as the root of sacrifice, an act of immolation, or shedding of blood, as well as the Greek gerarchia from hieros, angelic hierarchy, in Paradiso 18, when Dante is discussing the angelic, 28, I'm sorry, the angelic hierarchies along the lines of the Pseudo Dionysus. If in another case sacred entails an occurrence that enters and interrupts the course of ordinary experience, in the case of the angelic ranks, the sacred defines that which stands apart, detached from the profane and the secular. So the sacred is really can be defined as that which is ambiguously part of the world, that sacralizes the world, but at the same time is removed from the profane. The word sacred does not appear in Inferno 19, but its workings through the sacraments bring to a sharp focus the issue of language and fraud in the previous canto. And as hinted above, let me go back now to the historical situation. The reference to Simon commemorates a privileged time in the history of the Church and its apostolic constitution, the time of the descent of the Spirit in the form of gifts of prophecy or tongues of flames on the heads of the apostles. In Acts 8:14-24, the account of the origins of the new Christian dispensation and of the renewed consecration of the apostles relates a crucial episode, which Dante is here echoing. We are told of Simon's unbelief in the divine nature of the miracle of speech in all tongues. In all tongues. Everybody can speak all languages, which clearly is the language of love, that he witnesses. He just doesn't believe it. The secret of the sacred proclamation of the apostles, the power of prophetic speech, has been given freely to them, but it remains beyond his reach, like a mystifying dirty trick. He views it as a magic imposture or technique and wants to buy the artifice of marvelous illusion from his homonym, Simon Peter, who later in the canto, line 91, is evoked as the authentic holder of the two keys. And Peter, Simon Peter, in Acts rebukes Simon Magus, the sorcerer. Now the proximity of the two names, the two antagonists in the spiritual drama, Simon Peter and Simon Magus, suggests the ease with which the line separating them can be obliterated and transgressed. The sharp differences between them can thereby appear faint and likely to be annulled. This proximity endangers the truth value of the Pentecost, the gift of language, and threatens to hide from us or make elusive the gulf that yawns between prophecy and idolatry, the holy and the diabolical. It also unveils the sin of Simon, Magus, as his followers, their will to erase the boundary separating the sacred from the profane. They're turning upside down the gifts of the Holy Spirit and of all spiritual reality as the root of the historical chaos that the cantor will go on dramatizing. More about this. The confusion between these two opposed domains of, respectively, belief and magic is primarily figured, aptly enough, through a metaphorical juxtaposition between an economy of gifts and the economy, the model of which is the marketplace. So we have free gifts versus the marketplace. A pattern of inversions, exchanges of roles, and mistaken identities, taking one person for another, follows the fundamental economic paradigm and sustains the unfolding of the canto. We witness a grotesque theatrical performance, a morality play turned upside down. The Pope's name, Boniface, is an ironic misnomer of an evildoer, one who does the evil under the mask of the good. The sinners' bodies are put in reverse positions. The Pentecostal flames burn not on their heads, but on the soles of their feet. Dantis is mistaken by Pope Nicholas for Boniface, and the blatant role reversal marks the exchange between Nicholas, who appears as the perfido assassino, the assassin who broke faith, perfidious, a murderer trampling on the faith, and the pilgrim who self-consciously plays the sacerdotal role of the friar confessor. I stood as does the friar who confesses, he'll say, on line 49. One reasonably suspects, may I add, that the phrase frate che confessa, a friar who confesses, subtly alludes, and Nick Haverly probably will have more to say about this in the discussion, but subtly alludes, as we shall find later in the poem, to the Franciscans, the religious order that, with Boniface VIII, uphold the practice of confessions. Simony is that cast as the ground or root out of which all other spiritual inversions grow. One can infer that it enjoys a special privilege because, by striking down the sacramental core of the Church and its prophetic life in the world, it makes the spiritual authority of the Church flounder. Well, maybe that's why it's so crucial. The popes we meet in this ditch have embraced the authority of Simon Magus and have thereby abandoned that of Peter. They have chosen to follow the idols of gold and silver and have forfeited Peter's tesoro. And the oppositions are all clear and sharply drawn throughout. By trafficking in sacred things, what are the sacred things that they traffic in? Nepotism, selling of holy offices, pursuit of benefices, which are revenues attached to ecclesiastical positions, remissions of sins for money, etc. They have reduced what was gratuitously given into a market commodity and have reified and converted into mere materiality what Dante calls, line 1, the le cose di Dio, the things of God. And I take this phrase, the things of God, to mean that the sacraments are sacred acts of divine institution, whereby we attain knowledge of the spiritual good. Dante's recognition of simony as a primary violation of the sacred is shown by the recall of almost the whole gamut of the Church's sacramental life, almost all the sacraments. So I have to order this whole program. What are the sacraments? First of all, let me tell you what they are. The pilgrim, for instance, makes a public confession of breaking a baptismal font in the baptistry of his San Giovanni. The canto is introduced by an invective against the simoniacs' breakdown of their vows of mystical marriage, which is ordination. It features a scene of mockery of confession acted out by the pilgrim. It contains a brief remark about the burning of cose unte, anointed things, a phrase which, given its dramatic context, can only allude to the chrism or consecrated oil used in religious rites of confirmation or extreme unction. In short, the symbolic value of sacramental life is reduced into its constitutive materiality. That's crucial. The mistake is to believe that materiality doesn't matter. Dante would hold to this principle. You can talk for spiritual things, but you must have some, they must be rooted in materiality. And now it appears as a sequence of sacrilegious gestures. But the simoniacs reduce them only reduce the sacred things only to the material component. They are there, but half there, as it were. Why is Dante so troubled in this canto by the pervasive desecration he witnesses as to direct his attention to its most minute phenomena? What is it about the defilement of the sacraments that he should view it with so much indignation and dread? The insistent references to the profanation of sacramental acts or holy places, such as San Giovanni, where the sacraments are administered, force us to the realization that he does not understand the sacraments as merely symbolic and formal rituals or empty doctrinal abstractions. Quite to the contrary, they stand at the center of his representation of the physical, everyday existence in Inferno 19. And he uncovers their significance in the light of the blasphemous distortions. It is the distortions, paradoxically enough, that let the poet adopt a perspective of the necessity and significance of the sacraments. The physical distortion makes one thing clear. The sacraments have their source in the concreteness of human experience. Being born, dying, eating, sexuality, speech, food, etc. From this standpoint, they express and shape the reality of 13th century men and women, in that they both charge their existence with a transcendent value and have the power to draw each of them into a relationship with the divine and with each other. In contradicting the simultaneously concrete and spiritual values, and in making money the sacred standard of value, Simon's blasphemy both negates and acknowledges the existence of the sacred, even as he reduces it to a matter of utilitarianism. In his quest for the wealth that magic play engenders, Simon loses sight of the gift he had received, namely the power of speech, and thereby he annihilates the gifts of the Holy Spirit. But by calling on Simon and his apostrophe, Dante actually responds to Simon by showing the evil of simony to be not an isolated moral perversion confined within its own limits, but an occurrence with ripples and consequences that reach wide and deep into the world of history. The sacred is for Dante primordial, fundamental power that disrupts and yet permeates and anchors the complex realities of political, theological ideologies. A major clue to the theological political importance of simony is provided by the fact that it is anchored to the history of popes, kings, and the Emperor Constantine. There is one essential sacramental liturgical figure, however, on which all these historical characters hang together. It is the figure of marriage. Marriage is running throughout, and we'll give some evidence as we go on. From this standpoint, the political philosophy articulated in Dante's Monarchia, on world government, that he wrote late in his life, provides the context for the moral debates dramatized in Inferno 19. One fundamental assumption underlies the political tract, and Dante picks it up even in Purgatorio 6, invective against the Italian civil wars, namely the principle of separation of church and empire. Political and spiritual order depends on the recognition of this necessity of a separation between them. The two institutions share some symbolic structures and liturgies: the doctrine of the body politic as a secularization of the mystical body, the marriage of the emperor to the state, which is akin to the mystical marriage of the pope to the church, theocratic doctrines of subordination of the empire to the church, etc. The sacrament of marriage in Inferno 19 is given particular prominence exactly because it dramatizes the two emblems of secular, imperial, and spiritual or church order. The tradition rests, of course, on Ephesians 5:29-30, which represents the church
as a mystical body, and the state, by analogy, with the church, and thanks to the fable of Menenius that some of you may recall from your high school days, as a political body. Dante focuses on the degradation of the sacrament, and thereby he makes intelligible both the crisis of both the necessity and the crisis of this paradigm of order. More importantly, he retrieves the specific theological and political debates that developed around the marriage metaphor. And we go a little back into the intellectual history. These debates, available in the Trinitarian interpretations of history by Joachim of Flora, involved apocalyptic visions, prophetic postures, heretical movements within the 12th and 13th century church. First, let me highlight the extensive references to the metaphors of marriage and concomitant adultery and sexual violence. Always alert, as he is, to the cluster of sexuality, money, and religion, Dante stresses, as pointed out earlier, that the Simoniac popes have degraded the mystical marriage of the church into the mere physical practice of prostitution. The seduction and flattery of the harlot, ties, and 18, are quickly forgotten, although the shadow of her figuration hovers over other details of the canto. We read of Boniface VIII rape of La Bella Donna, line 57. The church, and the language of whoring, extends to St. John the Evangelist's enigmatic vision, which Dante echoes, lines 106, 111. Di voi pastor s'accorse il Evangelista quando colei che siede sopra l'acque puttaneggiar quei regi a lui fu vista, quella che con le 7 teste nacque e dalle 10 corna ebbe argomento finché virtute al suo marito piacque. The lines overtly allude to St. John, who in the book of Revelation 17:1-3 presents a whore who sits upon the waters. The figure was interpreted by church fathers to refer to pagan Rome, overcome by the church. But the spiritual Franciscans, such as Gerardo di Borgo Sandunino and Ubertino da Casale, saw in it a prophetic announcement of the defilement of the mystical body of the church as the whore of Babylon, or the Ecclesia Carnalis, the carnal church, with the Pope as the bridegroom, the 7 heads, the gifts of the Holy Spirit, or the sacraments, and the 10 horns, the commandments. In the wake of Joachim of Flora's eternal evangel, and his eschatological predictions of an imminent messianic age, the age of the Paraclete, both Ubertino and Gerardo expected a purification of the church. In the readings, the advent of an eschatological ecclesia spiritualis, emptied of historical concreteness, was heralded by the preaching of the spiritual Franciscans. So there was this idea that the carnal church, the Church of Babylon, now would be transcended, would change into a purified spiritual church. And the spiritual church meant the end of time and the dehistoricization of the world. The world loses its own historical configuration, the actual historical configuration. Dante collapses together the two antithetical allegorical interpretations of pagan Rome and carnal church. The canto places us in Rome, not in the world of the Roman comedy of Terence, but the Rome of contemporary Christian history, where theology is tragically adulterated with politics, and vice versa. Is this adulteration inevitable? The present time is for him the time marked by the absolute surrender of the Church's spiritual authority to political maneuvers. The hybrid events that Dante chronicles pivot on 1300, the year of the Jubilee proclaimed by the reigning Pope Boniface VIII. And he lists the abuses perpetrated by Nicholas III of the Orsini family, and he plays with the emblem of his family, the Ursa and the Orsatti being his own children that he had to take care of. Pope Orsini, who was elected Pope in 1272. His practice of simony, so we are told, was faithfully continued, both by his successors, Boniface VIII of the Gaetani family, and by Clement V, who is called the lawless shepherd of Gascony and Archbishop of Bordeaux, He moved the papal see, he's famous for moving the papal see from Rome to Avignon, just as Constantine, almost 1,000 years earlier, had moved the see of the empire from Rome to a small town at the time known as Byzantium. The church's transfer from Rome to Avignon, willed by Clement V, brought about ominous times in the history of the church and world history, and Dante cannot but acknowledge Clement V as the agent in the process of reciprocal entanglements between church and empire. One detail in the rhetorical reconstruction of the canto reveals Dante's sense of the complicity of the two institutions that have historically drawn each other into an endless cycle of corruption. And I indicated that a little earlier, the initial apostolate to Simon or Simon Mago is balanced by the invective against the Emperor Constantine, who contaminated the spiritual authority of the church with the donation, the so-called donation of Constantine, the temporal powers to Pope Sylvester I. Costantino, di quanto mal fu madre, non la tua conversione, ma quella dote che da te prese il primo ricco padre. Lines 115, 117. The invective rehearses Dante's own condemnation in Monarchia 3:3, Book 3, Chapter 3, and Book 3, Chapter 13. The invective's language, it may be added, hints at an incongruous marriage between empire and church. More to the point, in the light of Constantine's parallel manipulation of the church, Clement V effects the political subjugation of the church to Philip the Fair and makes her hostage to the French king's imperial fantasies. His decision reenacts both the biblical story of Jason, who bought the office, not the other Jason, this is the biblical Jason, who bought the office of high priest of the Jews from King Antiochus of Syria, and Simon's attempted bribery of Peter. I would like to suggest that Dante's bleak history of the bonds between church and empire echoes a text that has become, among spiritual Franciscans, from Ubertino to Jean-Pierre Olivier, who taught, who preached at the Franciscan church in Florence, Santa Croce, a classic of apocalyptic spirituality. Joachim of Flora's Book of Figures, Liber Figurarum. That's really the text that Dante, I think, is alluding to. There's hardly any doubt this is a text that has been made available only recently, thanks to Marjorie Reeves working on Joachim of Flora. There's hardly any doubt that Dante knows this text. He uses Joachim's picture, that's the Liber Figurarum, Book of Figures, of the three interlacing rings of God as three rainbows, each reflected in the others, and the very final vision of God, of the deity, whatever he sees of the deity, in Paradiso 33. It clearly comes from the Liber Figurarum. At any rate, Joachim of Flora, whose dates are 1135, 1202, wrote his Book of Figures before his death, before 1202. It was collected in 1202 and rediscovered in 1937. The combination of figures and commentary, which Marjorie Reeves rightly views as an extension of Joachim's symbolic or figural theology, makes up his view of the Trinitarian structure of history. That's what Joachim is known for, the Trinitarian understanding, interpretation of history, which he divides according to the persons of the Trinity in the age of the Father, from creation to the moment of the incarnation, the age of the Son, from the incarnation of Christ to 1260, and the age of the Spirit from 1260 to the imminent end of the world. So the three successive phases of theology of history. By an exegesis of the Apocalypse, the Book of Figures provides a sketch of the constitution of the Third Age, which is said to be prepared by 7 kings, whose emblem is a 7-headed dragon. This is from the Apocalypse of John, which Dante also echoes in Inferno 19. The first king coincides with the time of the apostles. It goes through the time of the conventuals, and then the process ends with the seventh king, who is properly called the Antichrist. Joachim begins his commentary on the 7-headed dragon by quoting, as Dante does, the passage from Apocalypse 12:3-4 and 17:12-16. That's the passage in the Apocalypse. A great sign appeared in heaven, a vast red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and he interprets the 7 heads of the dragon to signify 7 tyrants by whom the persecution of the church were begun. He continues by evoking the struggles of the church beset by false prophets. At the end of time and of years, when Satan, pretending to be what he is not, that is to say Christ, will be freed from his prison and will go forth and seduce the nations there at the 4 corners of the earth. And he adds this that I want to read. In that time, also the 7th head of the dragon will arise, namely that king who is called Antichrist, and a multitude of false prophets with him. We think that he will arise from the west and will come to the aid of that king who will be the head of the pagans. He will perform great signs before him and his army, just as Simon Magus did inside the sight of Nero. Let me think about Joachim and Dante a moment, and then I will go on briefly. In spite of the link between the figure of Simon Magus and St. John's prophecy of the 7-headed dragon, both Joachim and Dante deploy, Dante is not a Joachimite. As many, especially my dear friend Robert Casky used to maintain. Dante certainly acknowledges Joachim's gift of this prophetic spirit. He will call him in the spirit of the wise in Paradiso 12, the spirito profetico dotato, endowed with prophetic spirit. In this acknowledgement, Dante stands close to the Franciscan spirituals, Gerardo di Borgo San Domenico, Bertino, and Olivier, de Jean-Pierre Olivier, who had hailed Joachim as a prophet, heralding in the new age. But this view of the spiritual Franciscans openly defied the condemnation of Joachim launched by the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 and sealed by St. Bonaventure. St. Bonaventure was fierce against Joachim in the famous Correlaciones, this book of lectures that he gave at the University of Paris in 1274. In point of fact, however, Dante opposes the utopianism and apocalyptic thrust of the Joachimites. Joachim is in error because he envisions the third age of the Spirit as a time of fraternal orders that would be marked by the dissolution of all institutions, marriage, hierarchies, ceremonies, churches, and the consequent ahistorical reconsecration of the world of immanence. Where do we have the evidence that Dante really does not agree with much of this? Dante upholds, I'll say, the value of institutions. In the presence of Nicholas, in Inferno 19, in the presence of Pope Nicholas, Dante feels a reverenza, he calls it, a reverence. E se non fosse che ancora lo mi vieta la reverenza delle somme chiavi. He says, I have this reverence for the highest keys of the office of the papacy, an allusion to the so-called principle of dignitas non moritur. Dignity never dies. The incumbent may be evil, the office maintains its sacredness. And I'm alluding to here, I have to give special mention to a study of Panofsky on the king's 2 bodies. So Dante stresses this point of this disagreement with the Joachimites. Such a theory that Joachim and his followers have in reality resembles the seeming antithetical project of Simon Magus' idolatrous practice in one central aspect. Simon dissolves the principle of transcendence by the reduction of the sacred to the status of a theatrical performance. Joachim achieves the same effect by the divinization of the world of immanence. He is an impatient utopist. In Inferno 19, however, Dante picks up Joachim's concern about false prophets and shows the problematical and yet necessary nature of all prophetic discourse, a discourse that resists squalid accommodations to political compromises. There must always be prophecies. Dante is writing Canto 19 in favor of a discourse that exceeds the world of history. In this Canto 19, the profanation of prophecies of a piece with a conviction both that the words and signs, aptly enough, in the Canto of Fraud, signify nothing, and the ultimate rejection of history. His concerns are crystallized by St. Mago's sin, and his practical concerns he seeks to silence the new kind of speech that was inaugurated by the Pentecost. The poet responds to Simon by retrieving the power of language. He steps on the public stage. O Simon Mago, o miseri seguaci. And then he has this whole allusion to he steps on the public stage, the platea, as it were, the piazza, the marketplace. And like a town crier, that's the role he takes. He blasts the trumpet to announce in public his reading of a judicial sentence against common criminals. O convien che per voi suoni la tromba, però che nella terza bolgia state. The words he will utter echo the language of the biblical prophets, such as Hosea and Isaiah 1:4-6, Hosea 5:1-3, and they sustain actually the dialogue going on in the canto. The main rhetorical mode of Inferno 19, as I said a little earlier, is invective, a mode which is a biblical prophetic pedigree. And what is an invective? We speak of invectives if we knew what it was. I should ask the question, what is an invective? An invective can be defined, first of all, as both a verbal attack against and a radical response to the practitioners of false speech. And Dante goes on to say that he uses parole vere. He uses true words, as he's also been claiming, or my colleagues have been talking about this question of the claim of truth that Dante seems to be making. And one can make a claim of truth only if one feels besieged by and maybe endangered in that very claim by the witnessing false speech all over. And Dante is dramatizing that very problem in Canto 19, as I proceed to show. But let me continue with what invective is. Second, through his invectives, the poet who takes on a prophetic posture, just as he's been taking on the posture of the courtier in Canto 13 or Canto 5, the political the political advisor in Canto 10, the political partisan, and so Dante's whole movement is a taking on of different postures. So it takes on a prophetic posture in the guise of a town crier, attempts to protect creation. That's what invective does. The attempted creation of a public space. Such a space is not a marketplace, but a genuine historical area for his testimony. Third, through his invectives, the poet wants his words to become deeds. That's what an invective does. It's a belief that people can take you seriously. To be invested with the reality of things, whereby they acquire the power to enter history and shape it. But more is at stake in these claims. Let me list, first of all, the three major occurrences of invectives in the Canto. I've already pointed out that the Canto opens with an invective against Simon Magus and the popes who have followed him in his tracks. It closes symmetrically with another invective against the Emperor Constantine and his donation to Pope Sylvester. In between, Nicholas III, the Simoniac poet, who is there in hell, in Canto 19, himself launches into an invective against Boniface for deceiving the beautiful lady, the church. It's noted here with his attack by Nicholas, theology has become politics, and politics is smuggled as theology. More poignantly, Nicholas III's invective excoriates Boniface VIII, and Dante may even sympathize with Nicholas III. But Dante also suggests that the depraved Nicholas' bombastic speech is in fact a rhetorical mask to conceal the charlatan's lies. Anybody can claim to be a prophet, that's the point. Dante is here witnessing this possibility of his being taken in a certain way. It immerses us then, the whole idea of the depraved speech of Nicholas, in a carnival of grotesque role reversals. Now we understand why role reversals, disguises, denunciations of abuses perpetrated, of course, by others. Invectives can indeed turn into self-serving postures. And because the Pope appears as a clown who wastes and defiles the words in his keeping, Dante's further invective turns on him and on his avarice. one textual detail, I gotta go back to the beginning again. I hope I'm not taking too much time of your time. I'm almost done. One textual detail highlights his critical self-consciousness of the complexities of this rhetorical mode. In the middle of these invectives against abuse and profanation of the sacred, the public focus that has so far characterized Dante's language immediately shifts to a private, autobiographical occurrence. He makes a scandal of himself by confessing publicly to one past violation of the sphere of the sacred, or what is known as unwarranted interventio in sacris, a medieval theological legal formula, the forbidding of touching holy things, the principle of separation, the notion of a tabernacle, right? What in Orthodoxy is called the iconostasis, the separation of the profane from the sacred. To describe the round holes into which the sinful popes had plunged, Dante compares them to an octagonal, because it's the number of the baptism, of course, the octagonal baptismal tubs in the baptistry of St. John in Florence, 1618. He adds that not many years earlier, he had broken one in order to save a person drowning in it, l'un degli quali ancora non è molt'anni, ruppio, per un che dentro vannegava. E questo si succede, che ognuno scanni. Let everybody be undeceived. Scholars have notoriously debated the sense of this confession. Did Dante break some sort of vow? That's what they argue, that he made in the place where he received his baptism. Is he admitting to an occasional iconoclastic violence against the mere ceremony of cults? I don't know. The scholars, however, have not yet found a satisfactory solution to the textual reference. One thing is clear. The voice of the poet chooses not to be muffled by his past violation. He will talk about it. He will confess to it. On the contrary, he confers on his statement, as I said, the sigillum, the seal of legal or spiritual authority to undeceive, all at the very point where he vokes his past transgression. But the sigillum, the truth of witnessing, that's what the sigillum is. He wills to invest his words with an authoritative truth value. In fact, he acknowledges his desire that his invective, like the Pentecostal gift of tongues, can create reality anew. Beneath this wish, as well as beneath the confessional self-exculpation, lies the pilgrim's poet's deeper anxiety, the possible arbitrariness and attendant sense of urgency for a prophetic perspective. There is one text that I would like, and I lend my remarks with this text, and a text that I think glosses this episode. It's in the epistle to the Italian cardinals, which is really a gloss on this Dante's sense of danger and simultaneous desire to establish, as Joachim had done, a distinction between simony and prophecy, a desire to establish a distinction. Let me first of all put it in context. The epistle was written, as Paget Toynbee recounted, after the death on April 20, 1314 of the Gascon Pope Clement V, del Wasco. Following his death, 24 cardinals met in conclave in Carpentras. The conclave was violently broken up just before September the 8th, 1314, and only 2 years later, on August the 7th, 1316, another Frenchman, Jacques II, Archbishop of Avignon, was elected Pope and took the name of John the 22nd. 6 of the cardinals in the conclave were Italian. Among them are the relatives of the popes mentioned in Inferno 19, such as Napoleone Orsini and Francesco Caetani. One is for Nicholas III, the other one is for Boniface VIII. And to them Dante addresses this epistle. The letter excoriates the Italian cardinals' conduct. He accuses them of simony, you who sell doves in the temple, where that which cannot be measured by price is made merchandise to the hurt of them that come and go therein. Paragraph 4. The behavior has, he says, compelled him to lift up his voice. Paragraph 9. The phrase defines the prophetic mode of the epistle. Dante attacks the cardinals for neglecting to guide the chariot of the spouse. And in a language drawn from the account of the fire at the descent of the Pentecost, they are said to scorn the fire, quote, scorn the fire sent down from heaven upon their altars, end quote. Finally, reflecting on his own boldness in denouncing the cardinals and usurping the spiritual authority, Dante writes the following. Perchance, in indignant rebuke, you, the cardinals, will ask, who is this man who, not fearing the sudden punishment of Uzza, sets himself up to protect the ark, tottering though it be? Verily, I'm one of the least of the sheep of the pasture of Jesus Christ. Verily, I abuse no pastoral authority, seeing that I possess no riches. But the grace, therefore, not of riches, but of God. I am what I am, and the zeal of his house hath eaten me up. These are the justification for my boldness. And besides these, I have the authority of the philosopher Aristotle. Nor should the presumption of Uzza, which some may think should be led to my charge, infect me, as though I had been rash in my utterances. For, and you must love the sophistry here, for he gave heed to the ark, and stretched his hand to protect it from what he thought would be collapsing. I to the utterly oxen that are dragging it away into the wilderness. Paragraph 5. The text, just to paraphrase and make it clear, alludes to the story of Uzza, now Kings 6:3a, a bystander who was struck by lightning for daring to lay hands on a sacred object, the ark, carrying the tablets of the law. Dante claims that he understands the difference between Uzza and himself, between Nicola's invective and his own, and between Simon's magic imposture and his concerns. His authority, he states in the letter, is of a philosophical nature, removed from the values of the marketplace, springing from his friendship with truth, and warranted by his poverty. By breaking the forms, he has actually broken the grip idolatry has upon him. The violent act of breaking, justified by the superior aim of salvaging one drowning in it, allows the poet to lay bare a number of claims. First, he unveils that the perversions of history's institutions, church and empire, and to uncover that the reform must be rooted in the sacred. In Inferno 19, I conclude, Dante says to reflect on the age-old quarrel between theology and politics, whose practices appear joined together by their shared and contingent idolatry of power. By this power, the emperors acquire a charismatic value, and the popes surrender the charisma, as if they were nihilists who invest the spiritual gift with a believable physical concreteness. The way out for the poet is found in the power of his word. He's moved by the persuasion that only the free play or gift of his poetic language, like prophetic speech, can make a difference and resist the real disruptiveness of evildoers. Prophecy alone, as the Franciscans and Joachim of Flora understood, can be a scandal to the economy of the marketplace and the desecration of the world. For Dante, prophecy can make a difference because it's a sign of contradiction and self-contradiction. It claims to the seal of truth, but it also confesses its arbitrariness. And it can speak as all the impostors do, as a note of contradictions. The poet's language can bring back what the deluded utopists like Joachim and the Franciscans, the counter-movement friars, and the wranglers for justice grasped and yet failed to deliver the need of the sacred in history, both part of it and capable of exceeding its narrow confines. But Dante knows enough of self-deceptions, and in Canto 20, he quickly turns to the fate of the diviners. Thank you for your attention.